Hi, and welcome to our program. Today we are seeing the city of Aarhus through the eyes of David, a poverty walk guide. The initiative brings knowledge and information about the conditions of the most vulnerable. Let's go meet David.
So when you see someone living space, yeah, it's probably not going to look too attractive, but understand that it's actually theirs, and they expect you and would like you to treat it with the same respect that your living accommodation and space is respected. Right? It may not be much, but it's ours, and it might be the only thing we've got. And we can get really ugly about people trying to take it off us, or trying to trash it, or basically in any way disrespect. As I said earlier, one of the biggest deciding factors about whether we even try to come off the streets, never mind succeed, is your opinion towards us. How you treat where I live is a pretty big indication of what you feel about me. Why would I want to participate in a culture that rejects me? That, you know, is basically saying, oh, you're scum, and I don't care about where you live. Guess what? I don't care about you then. Division in a culture, when we start picking and choosing individuals based on their social and economic status, is pretty negative, all right? But it's becoming increasingly the case, and one of the groups, and this actually came as a bit of a shock, that is beginning to face some pretty harsh and increasing negativity, is a group that we never used to see out here, and that is actually your generation. We're not going to go there, we're going to walk past it, but there's a building over there run by the Kirkens Corsair. It's basically a shelter for young people. It's like the Bastille, but for your generation. There's a reason why we keep the young separated from the old. Right? Same reason we do it in prisons. The young, we might still be able to help. The older ones, the chances are a lot less. Because if we can't drag ourselves up, we'll drag you down. All right? Make no mistake, there are vultures in the community. All right? And the younger you are, the more vulnerable you are, the more easy you are to be manipulated. All right? I speak of this with some degree of experience. Because while youth homelessness in Denmark is a new thing, it isn't in the UK. All right? You know, youth criminality is a lot less in Denmark than it is in the UK. I actually made a joke, and it wasn't that much of a joke. I could hold my school reunion on the exercise yard of the local prison. And people say to me, like, prison must have been rough. No, not compared to where we grew up. That's where I lived as a child. That was the 1970s in England. And people wonder why prison wasn't that big a deal to me. Compared to that, hey, in prison we had electricity. I actually had hot water in the cell. Which is not something I had in my house for most of my childhood. All right? One of the reasons why living on the streets isn't that, I grew up with this. But an entire generation of young men and women grew up in those conditions. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of us. And you all wonder why we all turn to crime. You wonder why we spent out, you know, when we held our school reunions in the local prison. None of us expected anything else. Right? I never expected not to go to jail. That's what happens when you lose hope as a young person. It becomes very, very difficult to reach us, to give us any kind of belief in the future. Because our past and our present suck. We had no reason to suspect that our futures would be any better. All right? Which meant you lost us for literally a generation. All right? I started actively stealing when I was 14 years of age. All right? I didn't turn my life around until my mid-30s. 20 years gone. And it's coming to you. Not to the same extent, but it's definitely coming. The existence of places like that one over there shows me that you're beginning to lose. There are certain groups of young people in your society that you're losing. As a society, you can't afford to do that. You can't afford to do it on a human level. You can't afford to do it on a societal level. Because one thing, Denmark's a lot smaller than the UK. Right? You can't afford to lose hundreds of people, right? For this society to exist, it needs the work of all of us, right? The cost of losing a generation is the cost you will pay for a generation. It's not my, you know, I have no control over this one, but I would recommend you seriously look at the situation. Now, I'm not saying that for some of the young, they don't have legitimate reasons to get out of the house, right? Some of their situations are pretty bad. And I don't know what but what I would say to them is, and I will say this to anyone without any, however bad your situation is, there are places you can go, there are people you can listen to. You do not have to deal with it on your own, all right? The fundamental difference between my home country when I was growing up at your age and yours is that there are places that you could go. There was nowhere for me to go. I dealt with my anger and my frustration internally, and I took it out violently on others. You don't need to do that. I understand it's hard to ask. I get it. But guess what? I'll tell you what's really hard. Being in the back of a police car with your face pressed against the window with a gun to your back, staring out into a world you are not going to see again for many, many years. Because the anger you feel, the rage against society that you feel, guess what? You're the one that's going to pay for it in the long run, not them. Your lives, your choices. You'll have options. Take them. This is one of the things that gets me really annoyed sometimes in Denmark when I hear people complaining. I would have literally given up my right arm for the options that you treat so casually sometimes. I could not believe that a country like this, when people ask me, when people, they give you money to go to school. I could not believe that they actually give you money. Freaked me the hell out. I couldn't, it was like one of the hardest things to deal with. It's like, oh, and it's like, just over there, a few hundred miles away, it's a country where basically, unless you pay for your education, you're screwed. You're getting paid to do it. Think about it. So we're living in tents, we're living in shelters as young. There are homes, there are lives. They're hard to live, and they sometimes don't have the hope and of a decent future that we would have wished for. But there are hours you mess with them at your own risk. Any questions before we move on? No? In that case, follow me. Building behind you, police station. Basically, my relationships with the police, I try to avoid them. All right? Not because I have any guilt about my activities, I don't. I'm not doing anything illegal. It's just that they're cops and they're not my friends, they're yours. And I know this for a fact. This isn't even prejudice on my part, this is an actual fact because they've told me. Several years ago I did a documentary for TV2 and then it was shown on local television. Long story, but I'll cut it short. A friend of mine, his girlfriend was studying film and she had to do a school project and she asked if she could do it on me. I didn't really want to do it because, to be honest, don't take this personally, but being followed with a camera is not necessarily my idea of a good time, right? It makes me noticeable, and I'm trying to be slightly discreet. But they were friends, and they were also a couple of the only people that I still knew in the mainstream, right? So I agreed to it. Showed it in school. The editor, the teacher, whatever, liked it and decided to put it on the local TV station. Right? Okay. A couple of days later, I'm up by the town hall. And there's a group of police officers all sat down. And one of them sees me and he goes, I know you. I know who you are. And I know what you've done. But I also know you're not doing it here. So I said, yeah, okay, cool. So we're cool. I said, yeah, we're cool, but anything happens to you, unless you've got witnesses or it's on camera, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we're gonna do. It's your word against theirs, and your word doesn't mean anything. I'm like, okay, fair enough. Now I thought it might be the fact, okay, I'm a foreigner. No, had nothing to do with that. I'm an ex-convict. No, it even had nothing to do with that. It was everything to do with the fact that I was homeless. That was the problem. And you know something? He's right. Because like I said, I agreed to this because the person who asked me was one of the few people I still knew in the mainstream from my old life. People who were okay with me being, in many cases older than them, foreigner, convict. They had no problem with any of that. But as soon as I became homeless, they didn't want to know. That's odd. That was strange. It was the fact that people rejected me because of that. So it was kind of nice in a way to the police to tell me that you're on your own, and that's pretty much going to be the best you're ever going to get with any form of state agency, especially the police. Now, you occasionally have runs in with them. It's, like, for example, when I was sleeping up at Del.2, I once got woken up by them. They wanted to search my bags, and while they were doing so, there was two of them, female officer and a male. The female officer was cool. She went through my bags, we talked. The junior officer, on the other hand, he stood to one side with his hand on his gun. I've had cops point their weapons at me in the past. It's never a pleasant experience, and I'm also thinking, it's dark. Two police officers, one homeless guy, no witnesses. This is not a comfortable situation for a person to be in. All right? This is one of the reasons why we can become, and it's not just with the police, but it's with people in general, is that if you approach us or you come into us, we are going to step back and we are going to be slightly suspicious. Why? Because we have no comfort in believing that your desire for interaction with us is necessarily to our benefit. All right? Now, the first question I asked you this morning is, why are you here? That's a question I ask on a regular basis. And that's something that we always have to be cautious about when we're interacting with people on the streets. And I interact with people all the time. I'll give you and I'll show you why. Because of that. Trasksamler in Danish, I prefer the term pantjäger. It's more proactive. That's my job. When I'm not doing this, and I don't do this as much as I used to, that's how I managed to survive all these years. Which means I've had to walk these streets every day for over 10 years. Which means I put myself out there every day for 10 years. There are probably hundreds, if not thousands of people in this city who will recognise me by sight. And Aarhus ain't that big a place. Especially not the part of it I occupy. Which means I've got to understand that I am being watched. I have to know where I can go and where I can't go. Bus station, they're fine. Train station, they're not. Park alley, no problem. Gege goes gather. It's all cafes, bars and restaurants. I can take off the streets, I can take off out of the bins, but I can't take off the tables. I virtually never go down Strøget. My biggest personal asset, biggest professional asset, is my reputation. It's how I interact and how I behave with people. All right? These streets are not just my home, they're my office, and I share the office with others. And I have to understand that. Like Bruns Gallery, they don't like me working in there. The irony about Bruns Gallery is, I have walked through Bruns Gallery with no mask on. Right? Everyone else is wearing one, I'm not wearing one. I'm walking straight through. I walked past the security guard and he said not a word to me until I stopped to get a bottle out of the bin. That he wasn't going to tolerate. That he threw me out the place for. It was an interesting exercise, but it does show you how you have to understand individual feelings and views about stuff, and you have to work with it. Like I've been asked, a friend of mine, he was going out with this girl once, and she asked him to ask me not to go down the street that she worked on. Okay. You asked me nicely? Yeah, fine. But I've also had people who say, for example, at an office party, hey, you're the guy that collects bottles. We got some bottles in the office, do you want them? Why? Because they've seen me work, right? And they've seen me not be a problem, not be loud, not be drunk, not be aggressive, right? And they've responded to that. People like who have been out for one of these have said, "Oh, have given me." So you have to get to know your city, and you have to get to know let the city get to know you. I've been here a long time. This is pretty much my home now. All right? I need to make a living, but I also have no interest in upsetting people. There's a balance to be achieved, which if you don't, your life out here is going to suck. And like I say, I don't claim welfare, so this is it. If the city turns against me, I'm going to starve. I can't afford to let it happen. But I also can't afford to let myself be abused and be treated badly as well. None of us can as individual citizens, right? And because I don't have the comfort of the police, I have to make those. I have to ensure it myself. I have to make my own decisions and create my own actions. To be honest with you, I'd rather not, but I don't have any other choice in the matter. So that's the police, and that's the bottles. I'm going to talk about that building behind you. It's basically a school. Not only do they pay you to go to school, you pretty much have to go to school in this country. There's very little you're going to be able to do that's going to pay you anything that doesn't have some form of certification or education attached to it. Pretty much everybody, like I said, the friend of mine whose girlfriend asked him to ask me not to come down her street was a hairdresser. It takes 4 years to study to be a hairdresser in this country. That is an inordinate amount of time to cut hair. But it says something. It shows the priority given to education and also the necessity for it, because things have changed at a rapid pace. They continue to change rapidly. And if you don't keep up, you fall behind. And if you fall behind, you fall out of society. All right? When I was in prison, they decided to teach me printing. By the time I got out, the machine that I learned on was in a museum. You need an education, but you also need a high standard of education, one that is current, because otherwise, whatever you're doing, you have technology attached to it. Right? Even I have a smartphone. I even have a laptop. It's pretty much impossible, even for the homeless, to survive without one. Right? I have an MED. You know? I have all that stuff. I have to. And if I don't have it, I'm kind of screwed. So if I want a job, if I want to participate, I need an education. But I also need an education establishment that understands my particular issues as a person. Like when I got out of jail, I was supposed to go to university. I lasted a week. Why? Because I wasn't ready, but neither were they. They weren't used to dealing with convicts. They dealt with regular students. Like I was way older than the rest of the class. Different life experiences, different background, never going to happen. So you need a school that is providing you with an education, but you also need a school that is providing you with an atmosphere and a community that is supportive and understands you. One of the reasons that the education is important is not just for the skills that you're being provided with, but it also gives you a way to show people that you are not what many people think you are, which is lazy, undisciplined, or lack motivation. Because education takes, like I said, takes a long time. And to achieve it, you have to turn up on time, produce the work demanded at a standard demanded, and do that not just for days, weeks, months, but for years. Which means if you can do that, you can basically say to people, not only do I have the skill, I have the dedication, right? You're giving people legitimate reason to take a risk on you, and it is a risk to hire people like me. You know? People don't necessarily want to take it, so you need to give them reasons to do so. And in this culture, education is going to be the one. Right? But when I think things have changed, but certainly not that much. But when I came out of jail, there was nowhere that basically people like me could go to, right? The last thing pretty much the last place I wanted to hang out was basically with a bunch of 18 or 19-year-olds, right? I had nothing to say. On my first week, towards the end of the week, I told my lecturer that I would not be in class the next day because I had to go see my parole officer. She didn't even know that I was on parole. And as soon as I said those words, everybody in the class started reaching for their bags. I walked out of the class, I walked out of the city, I left the country. Complete violation, right? Went to France for a couple of weeks, came back and handed myself in, expecting to go back to prison, wanting to go back to prison. Turned out they didn't actually send me back. But I also didn't go back to university either. I've done a lot of things in my life which I wish I hadn't done. I think my biggest regret is the fact that I don't have an education. It would have given me options and chances that the lack of have kind of, caused me some problems over the years.
That was it for this program, but stay tuned for the next one. In the meantime, don't forget to check our Facebook page, BURT, for updates on our schedules and programs. See you soon.